What's going on, everyone? D-Ninja here, and welcome back to another Arena EDH. Here we analyze the pros and cons, I'll give you the bones to a basic deck, and then I'll give you my final thoughts and grade. Today's commander is Saheeli, Sublime Artificer. Her first ability reads, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you can create a 1/1 color servo token. And her -2 is, target artifact you control becomes a copy of another artifact you control or creature you control, except it's still an artifact in addition to its other types. So yes, the legendary rule still applies when you make this token, keep that in mind. And she starts with 5 power. I'll talk about more of that in detail when we get to the wrap up, but until then, let's jump right into the pros and cons. So number 1, low cost. Saheeli only costs 3 mana, and it's 3 blue or red mana, and 1 colorless. So when the commander tax piles on, it's not going to be that detrimental. And number 2, the deck is budget friendly. There are some mythics and rares you can run, but you don't have to, depending on how you build the deck. And number 3, the colors. Being in Izzet colors, you have access to damage, card draw, and really anything this deck wants to do. But with that out of the way, let's jump right into the cons. So for the cons, number 1, no payoff. Usually in a deck like this, you have some sort of payoff, whether it be the commander or a certain card combo. And there are card combos you can use in this deck, but your commander really doesn't help with any of those. And number 2, the deck is very slow. Depending on how you build it, and my preferred way and the way I see it mostly build is mid-range, but a lot closer to the control side. Because we are playing Historic Brawl, we don't have access to a lot of removal spells or counters. So you really have to slow play if you want to make this deck succeed. And number 3, hard to play. This deck is not beginner friendly in the least bit. Sometimes even intermediate players will struggle with this deck. But anyways, let's jump right into the bones. So the bones of a basic Saheeli deck is card draw, some value creatures if you want to play them, and some damage. What I've seen online and while playing Historic Arena myself is people tend to either run value or burn. So I'll give you some basic cards to, well, give you some ideas for either variant. But with that out of the way, let's jump right into it. So first up, we got Reckle the Elsewise. She gets +1/+0 for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard. Whenever you discard that many cards, you may draw that many cards, but only once per turn. So this card has a slot in any Saheeli deck, and cards like this that get stronger with the more instants and sorceries you have in your graveyard if you're going for more of a spell slinger build. But other than that, I'd still run this card because we do discard a lot and we do draw a lot of cards, and this will help keep your hand very full. So next up we got Shock. A classic, just deal 2 damage to anything. So if you're going more spell slinger or more burn style, you want to load up on cards like this. Or for a payoff, you could use that X spell that deals damage to a player. But in the mid-range build, we usually just run Shock. So next up we got Tormenting Voice. As additional cost, discard a card, draw 2. It combos very well with Reckle, allowing us to draw 3 cards instead of 2, and is one of the cheapest and best ways for red to draw. You're going to want a lot of card draw in no matter what variant of the deck you're playing, because you always want to keep your hand full to keep the card advantage, to keep the pressure on. So next up we got a fun one. We got Steel Overseer. You tap it, put a +1/+1 on each artifact creature you control. So this one's fun, just use Saheeli's -2. Turn one of your servos into another Steel Overseer and just keep tapping and keep powering everything up. So next up, it's a little more niche and you will have to build your deck around it, but it's the Transmogrify Ulamog combo. Saheeli makes tokens every time you play a non-creature spell, and Transmogrify allows you to exile a creature, doesn't matter if it's a token, and then reveal top cards from your deck until you hit a creature. And if Ulamog's the only creature in your deck, well, you get to play him for free. So next up is Badric Astral Archmage. If it's neither day or night, it becomes either or. Instants and sorceries you cast cost X less, where X is Badric's power. And whenever day becomes night or vice versa, you put a +1/+1 on him. So as long as this guy can sit on the battlefield, your spells are going to become immensely cheaper. And that's why I highly recommend this card. My most highly recommended card that you pick up is Galazeth Prismari. When he enters the battlefield, you create a treasure token, and artifacts you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, except you can only spend this mana to cast instants or sorceries. So this card combos beautifully with Saheeli. Saheeli makes all those tokens, and Galazeth makes sure that you always have mana to cast your spells. This is by far one of the best combos and one of the best cards in the entire deck. And so finally we have Kiseg Flame Breather. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, deal 1 damage to each opponent. There are a ton of cards that do this, and I'd recommend you fill your deck with some of these little pingers. Especially if you're going like Spellslinger or Burn. But even in mid-range, these cards do have a home. But with that out of the way, let's get into the final thoughts and grade. So first up for the grading, let's grade Saheeli as a commander. Her abilities are, well, they're kind of middle of the road. Making tokens and copying tokens would be a lot better if we had some more affinity support. But as it is, you can do a lot with this. So I'm going to give her ability a 3 out of 5. And for effectiveness, she really doesn't have a bad matchup. It's mainly dependent on your hand. She can go toe-to-toe with Slivers. She can go toe-to-toe with almost every other deck in the format. However, you get a bad hand and you're done. So that's why for effectiveness, I'm going to give her a 4 out of 5. So with that out of the way, let's jump right into the deck stats. Alright, consistency. Since we are playing blue and red and we do have a lot of card draw, dead hands do tend to come up quite often, so I'm going to give consistency a 3 out of 5. Because when testing this deck, I had to mold a 5 quite a bit, but that might just be my own personal bad luck. For power, you do play a lot of burn spells, even in mid-range Spellslinger, but overall, powerful creatures, unless you're playing the Ulamog variant, I'm going to have to give this deck a 2 out of 5. You can swarm the field with servo tokens, but at the same point, they are 1/1s, and if you don't have a Steel Overseer, you're just flooding with a bunch of 1/1s. For recovery, I'm going to have to give it a 1 out of 5. In testing and playing against, I've noticed after a board wipe or anything like that, it is very difficult for Saheeli to make a comeback. But for her overall rating, I'm going to give her a 6 out of 10. If everything comes together and you can counter that board wipe, you can do pretty much anything to keep your stuff on the board, you will win the game, no questions asked. And playing in Izzet colors, we have access to many a board wipe, many a card draw. We might not have the best in power or recovery, but overall, this deck is solid and is very fun to play. So like many of the other decks I feature on this channel, this deck is just a ton of fun to play. And it might have a low power ranking, but don't let that fool you. This deck can go toe-to-toe with Slivers, Cody, Voracious Codex, or however you say that card's name. And to me, those two are the top 2 decks in the format. Now, I might be giving those 2 decks a higher rating because that's mostly what I see these days, either that or Werewolves. But between the 3, I think Slivers is probably still the best deck in the format right now. And Saheeli can take on Slivers quite easily. You have blockers, you have access to a lot of burn, board wipes, everything. But that might have just been good RNG on my side. But anyways, I'm D Ninja, and I'm signing out. Bye-bye now.